Hello, welcome. Great to see so many of you again. I am Anna Hall, CEO of the Northeast Charter Schools Network. I'm joined today from our New York team by Natasha Cherry Perez, Chief of Staff of the New York Charter Schools Association, Michael Good, Director of School Support, and we're also, as always, super excited to be joined by our authorizer and partner co-hosts. Lisa, Executive Director, Lisa Long. I'm sorry. I feel like at this point we should all be on first name bases. Executive Director of the Charter Schools Office at SED. Catherine Connell Espinosa, Interim Executive Director at the SUNY Charter Schools Institute. Reza Schwanbeck. Now, Reza, this is my first time saying your name out loud.
Yes, it is Reza.
Reza.
Yes,
All
thank
right,
you.
awesome. Yeah,
Good
absolutely.
to see you.
Yeah, you as well. My maiden name was Valancourt. So I feel I have like endless affinity with people with names that benefit from pronunciation. So Reza Schwanbeck,
Yes.
Senior Director of Authorizing at NYC DOE, Erin Cochran, Interim Acting Senior Executive Director, all of the titles that she deserves, all of them, and Superwoman, Policy and Operations at NYC DOE, and Corey Callahan, also another Superwoman. All of us, so many Superwomen here. Sorry, Mike and David, because David, I saw you on as well, even though you're not on our shout out list. And Corey is General Counsel and VP of Legal Policy at the New York City Charter School Center. Woo! Happy May, everyone. And we'd love to recognize that May is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And we're really excited to be recognizing this month along with our schools. We also are marking this week as National Charter Schools Week. And so if you have any recognition of either things alongside Teacher Appreciation Week, please send us your pictures, information. We can also, you can also send any good news stories directly to us via email at comms@newyorkcharters.net, which I think Mike's going to drop in the chat. And also, as you're thinking about end of year celebrations, definitely let us know. We're happy to spotlight them. And we can also be helpful in connecting your school with elected officials and other folks to either attend, participate, or speak. In fact, we've had some elected officials from a variety of regions reach out to us indicating their interest in attending or participating in a graduation ceremony in particular. So if you're looking for an inspirational speaker or an elected official to help commemorate graduation or end of year event, definitely let us know. And to that end, if you're specifically interested in that, please email the email address that Mike is going to pop in the chat. That said, all of these emails get to all of us. And so never feel like you have to worry too much who you're emailing. Also, now that we are in May and there is a state budget, and I hate to say finally, many of the state budgets were very late, as Corey and others well know, just not in the past few years. We're going to take some time later on in the webinar to talk about the charter related items that emerged from this year's budget, this year's state budget. We'll also field any questions that you have at that point. But prior to jumping in there, we want to turn it over to updates and announcements, both from the association, the authorizers, and our partners. So we have a couple updates before I turn it over to others. Kicking off, we're really excited to be hosting Charter School Allies and Stakeholders for our 25th anniversary celebration of the passage of the New York State Charter Schools Act next week. In addition to marking this important milestone, we're also really excited to be showcasing the achievements of our state's charter schools with presentations by charter school leaders, students, and alumni. And I'm going to give a quick script update that we are going to be hosting a state speech champion team. And I've told my team internally, I am an OG speech and debate nerd. So really giving a big plug to come and get a chance to see that. We'll also be hosting honoring elected official champions and are going to be celebrating former Governor George Pataki, who was the governor who oversaw the passage of the state's Charter Schools Act. And we have some other special guests who will be attending who are part of the original Charter Schools Act 25 years ago. The celebration is next week on May 18th, beginning at 6 p.m. It's in New York City at Inside Park at St. Bart's, so just north of Grand Central. If you have any questions, you can let us know. And if you want to learn more about the event, as well as how to purchase tickets, I think Mike is going to drop a link to the chat. I will, at the risk of being snooty, this is a ticketed only event, in particular, given some of the participants. So if you're interested in coming and you're sort of thinking about it, or you're planning to just stop by, you absolutely have to let us know. There aren't going to be any admissions at the door without a ticket. So while we're on the subject of upcoming events, we also want to let you know that we've opened the call for presenters for the Charter Schools Conference in October. The annual conference in October. We're super excited. We're going to hold the conference in Albany this year. For those of you who don't know, we move it around the state so that everyone in the state gets the opportunity to host and show off their schools, and really sort of timely this year for it to be in Albany, given the 25-year anniversary as well. If you're interested in presenting at the conference, or you know of a group that you would really recommend to present at the conference, there are two types of venues for sharing content. There are sort of large group typical share out presentations that are sort of the typical breakout sessions. We also, last year, for those of you who joined us in Buffalo, we introduced a format that were called consulting office hours. And the idea here is folks who provide a more individualized consulting format can meet one-on-one with schools to talk about their services or their supports, as opposed to sort of a broader presentation where the presentation isn't necessarily as broadly applicable as some of the supports that they could provide. So for both venues, the proposals, the submission forms are going to be placed in the chat, and the deadline is August 11th. So many months away, but I will say that is going to be like a super hard deadline. So if you're interested, or you know folks who might be interested, please share it out. And if you want to have pre-conversations or you have any questions, definitely let us know. But we are, last year in Buffalo, and I'm probably going to misstate this, so Mike, good, please correct me if I'm wrong. We received 10 times as many applications as we were able to accommodate. And so we always want to be creative. And our number one goal is to raise up the practices of schools to support other schools. So if that's something that you think that there's a team on your school that would be interested in doing, and authorizer partners out there, if there are folks that you think should definitely have this stage, absolutely let us know. Our goal is to notify presenters in late August so that you have plenty of time to prepare. We can work out any related logistics. And I think Mike will also drop in the chat if you have specific questions about our conference. The email address will be in the chat. But again, lots of email addresses, not as many of us, just trying to streamline things for you all. And then we're going to open the full registration for the conference at the end of this month, because it feels like, I don't know about you guys, but it almost feels like we're already in the next school year. We also want to share two quick resources for schools, knowing that staff recruitment and school budgets are sort of, either number 1 and number 2, and maybe flip-flopping depending on your role at this time of year. So number 1 is we want to make sure that you all remember that we have a job board live on our website. This is a statewide resource, and you can use the job board to post vacancies throughout the school year, but we do get a lot of traction on it, and particularly in this time of year. So if you're a member, you simply use the request form on the webpage, and our team at the association will review the post and submit it. And if you have any questions about that, we will drop a tool in the chat, both for a link to the job board itself, as well as if you have a question about your member status. Because the job board is a benefit for those of you who are members. And I know folks have been getting communications about that for 23-24 already, because it feels like it's right around the corner. We're also making our school aid calculator available for FY 23-24. So you can use this link to make projection based on your FTE enrollment counts, especially if you serve multiple districts. You can do a weighted district enrollment across multiple districts for next year's district core aid rates. So the calculator is on our website at the link that Mike's going to put in the chat. And if you have any questions, definitely please let us know. And we're going to talk a little bit more, Mike and Natasha, about the core aid, the budget source of the core aid projections in the budget aspect of today's webinar. And so finally, before I pass it on, really excited to say that we're having our May Parent Council meeting tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. The chat to share with your families will be in the meeting. I actually apologize, I won't be able to join. I will be in my personal capacity hosting an event for a charter parent council member who is running for the Rochester School Board. So if you all could send her your best vibes, I know that she would appreciate it. And we're beginning to wrap up our final weeks of school support programming. We have additional communities of practice for school leaders and staff. And we have some May programming coming up in the chat that Mike will post. And then we're really, sort of wrapping for the end of the year. If you have feedback or ideas, suggestions, either on existing programming or other things that you think would be valuable for next year that we should be working towards, we're definitely going to be, like you, using this summer to already look ahead. So please share your thoughts. And finally, I'm going to quote Eric Uris here with a tip of the cap to Natasha about our voter registration work. And we wanted to share with you all that we're gearing up for voter registration because the primary elections, those of you who are sort of tuned into this stuff, the primary elections are now all aligned at the end of June 27th. And so that includes in New York City, city council, judges, school boards, and across the state. Those primaries, again, even thinking about the race that I just mentioned in Rochester, in many cases, the primary is the election. And the deadline to register to vote in the primaries is June 17th. So we want to help. If you would like support for your staff and or families to be registered to vote, we're dropping a site in the chat where you can register, find your polling site, become a poll worker, lots of opportunities there. And if this is something that you'd like to dive more deeply into with our team, we're really excited to help you do that. There's also a voter registration pep rally coming up on May 31st at 6. And folks who would like a virtual or in-person registration session or to get sort of more specific voter registration kits for their schools can request them ideally this week. Natasha's going to die inside when I say this, but if you're really interested and you tell us next week, we can stretch ourselves. But this is this is absolutely the time to make sure that folks know that being registered to vote is critical, which is a big shift. I'm sure you guys are aware. But important to make sure that staff and families are aware that the deadline is much earlier than it has been in the past. So having said all of that, thank you, Lisa, Catherine, Raisa, for your patience, and I'm going to turn it over to you all for updates. So I think I'm going to start with Lisa, and then Lisa, ask you to pass it to Catherine, if that works for you all.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone's well and enjoying this nice spring weather. I have just one update for you regarding the charter school program expansion grants. The questions regarding the RFP were due to the RFP mailbox at the close of business yesterday. So we are preparing responses, and we'll have those posted on our P12 website by May 22nd. And if this has been on your radar, then you know that the due date for the completed application, including an FS10 budget, is no later than June 5th. And in addition to the electronic submission, you must also submit an original copy of the FS10 budget with an original signature and postmarked no later than June 5th. Attention to Valerie in our office. So, and then one little informal announcement that he asked me not to make, but I'm just going to make it anyway. For those of you who haven't heard, David Frank is our newly appointed Assistant Commissioner. David, previously, for those of you who may not know, he was previously the Executive Director of the Charter School Office at the department, and he is now Assistant Commissioner for the Office of Education Policy. And in that role, he is working closely with the Commissioner and the Regent's Office and supporting our partnerships with BOCES, district superintendents, and he's also in charge of the non-public and Indigenous education offices. So if you haven't congratulated David, drop him a note and let him know how proud of him you are.
I think we can all come off mute and
Oh, thank you,
we're
everyone.
in the charter landscape, right? So this is the round of applause. Come on, you all know, that's right. Thanks, Angel. I see you.
The best thing was after a decade working here almost, I finally get a window and my own door. So I never had my own window before. So.
Those of you who haven't been in the SED offices, it is this phenomenally beautiful building with cubicles that are at like this height. So it's no small thing.
Exactly. Well, thanks for indulging me. I will now toss it over to Catherine for the SUNY updates.
All right, thank you, Lisa. Just a few updates from SUNY as well. I want to remind folks that the SSF grant application is due this Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. And as just a brief reminder, this funding is available for eligible charter school applicants with reimbursement for projects focused on facility construction, renovation, financing, leasehold improvements, and other facility-related expenses that would need to be completed between July 1 of 2022 through July 31st of this year. And eligible charter schools from any authorizer in New York State can apply, and the grants are available in amounts up to $200,000. So if anybody has any questions related to the grant, feel free to drop them in the chat. Sandy Malloy, our Director of Administration, is sitting in on the meeting today and is able to be responsive. Two other brief updates is wanted to remind folks of another funding opportunity that we have we'll be sharing information about in our newsletter as well, is the YAS Prize, which is a grant opportunity for innovative education change makers from all sectors of education. The current grant cycle is now open with applications due July 15th, and several SUNY authorized charters have been finalists and semi-finalists in recent years with recognition for outstanding programs. So we encourage folks to apply. The award itself offers $1 million in funding to the overall winner, along with an additional $10 million in awards to 64 other innovative education programs. Mike Lazinski is going to put some information in the chat on that. And last but not least, want to encourage folks to check out the Institute's Resource Center on our website, whether you're looking for information on model academic dashboards or perhaps a self-assessment tool for your Board of Trustees to adapt for your school's use. Please do check out our website and some of the resources that might be useful to you. And that is it from SUNY, and I will hand it off now to Risa.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. A couple of updates from the New York City Department of Education. So in the April meeting, I shared that we were finishing reviewing the annual comprehensive reports that our schools submit. So we've completed that process and have now sent feedback to the schools that are up for renewal in the coming school year. So the month of May for us is really devoted to having ACR visits to the school sites. Really excited to get to meet the schools, to get to see the schools. We will be visiting about 9 schools and also doing the reviews for the Big Apple Award. There are 2 schools with 4 teachers. The schools are Forte Prep and also Infinity KIP. So really excited. We did one school visit yesterday and another one is coming up on Friday. We've also continued to review all the DOE authorized school websites to make sure that they have easy to access contact information for their board members, and also to check to make sure that their meeting agendas, meetings, and everything is posted. And we are also currently planning for updating the renewal application that's going to be due on September 1st, and also setting up a renewal kickoff call for a little bit later this month.
Thanks so much, Raisa. I will pivot to larger NYC. So just a reminder to all NYC charter schools that we really need the fall planning survey. It is overdue at this point, and we've only heard from about half of the schools. This is a critical piece of information to help make sure that we know how to staff, where are you moving, what sites are you no longer operating in, what sites will be new, where are you continuing to operate, and what are your start dates. So I will pop that survey in the chat. It's really critical that we get that information as soon as possible. I know there are some schools that are waiting because the DOE hasn't released our calendar for next year yet. If you're in that boat and you're following the calendar, just take your best guess at the start date, and then you can always update from there. We definitely understand that there are schools that follow that calendar, and we can kind of plan around that uncertainty. And then just a reminder for charter schools that are eligible for rental assistance, the deadline to kind of hit that the first payment cycle payment is tomorrow. We've heard from a lot of schools that have a lot of questions about the documents that we're requesting and kind of the new policy that we've rolled out. So if you're in that boat, please don't hesitate to reach out to us so that we can support. And if in the event that you miss that deadline, that doesn't mean you're not going to get that money. It just means that you're next up for the next payment cycle. So we're happy to continue to support if folks have questions about the new policy or anything like that. Those are my updates. I will pass it over to Corey for any updates.
Thanks, Erin. Just following up on rental assistance, we are going to run a webinar next week, which I'll pop in the chat, which is for schools that have expanded grades. So this is the rental assistance webinar to kind of just explain the process. This is not the webinar to explain the new DOE policy. So just wanted to clarify that. There is a webinar that Erin has posted. You can access it in the C Weekly if you have questions on that. But this is really for folks that are in that new process, or maybe your school went through a great expansion 5 years ago and now new people have forgotten and you just kind of want a refresher. So we run this annually, and that will be next week. And the other thing I just wanted to touch on is the open meetings law. Schools often reach out to me in the intervening months because it is still true that New York City is under a city state of emergency with respect to COVID. So that triggers language in the statute allowing schools to still run their board meetings and board committee meetings virtually. With that being said, we're coming up on another 30-day amendment on May 20th. And I always get the question of like, do we know if it's going to be extended? And I don't know. And usually it happens the day of. They do not give any free warning. And I can't tell you for sure if it's coming or not, but I just wanted to acknowledge we are still under it. And around May 20th, we will find out if there's another 30-day extension, because that is the longest that they give. So it's 30 days and then we'll do this again. And that's all for me. So I think I will turn it back to Anna or Mike, who is taking us on. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you ladies so much. And really just want to appreciate the resources that you all put out there about rental assistance, which falls under this broader umbrella of the state budget, which is done. And I know, and all credit to Corey and her colleagues at the Charter Center, who had an update session either last week or the week before. The days are sort of running together for me. But after several extensions, for those of you who didn't participate or who haven't been specifically aware, the state budget is finalized. It was late, as I mentioned before. Late used to be the norm. Prior Governor Cuomo sort of made it his signature move to have an on-time budget, and Governor Hochul, in one of many ways that she is seeking to distinguish herself from her predecessor, said, I want a good budget, not necessarily an on-time budget, or my constituents expect and evaluate me on the content of the budget and not necessarily the timing. So fiscal year 24 budget is complete. And the total 229 billion with a B budget was 34.5 billion with a B for education funding in the upcoming school year. And we want to preview for you some of the charter specific provisions. So I'm going to pass it off, thank you, all right, to Natasha and Mike to speak to some of those specific pieces, and then very happy, we'll open the floor for questions at the end.
Okay, hi everybody. I hope everyone is having a good afternoon. I am Natasha Cherry Perez, and I'm going to talk to you about the lovely budget that was finally passed after several extensions. And so some key charter related features of the budget for FY24 is, of course, the reissuance of some of our zombie charters, district court aid rate funding for SY 23-24, and then also areas for continued advocacy and support. So we can go on to the next slide. So as far as the reissuance of zombie charters are concerned, and zombie charters are referred to charters that were previously granted and were closed or rescinded, and that continue to count against the state's charter cap. So what was passed was that 22 of the zombies that were closed since January 1st, 2015 will be reissued, and they will no longer count against the cap. As a result, 14 of those will be available in New York City, and 8 of those will be able to be used outside of New York City. So the 14 that were reissued for New York City, there is a caveat to that. They cannot be located in community school districts where the total charter school enrollment is greater than 55%. So that is the only caveat to those 14 reissued zombies for New York City. There will be no reissuance of charters that are closed after July 1, 2022. And also the regional cap is going to be left in place despite the governor's push to remove it, to remove that regional cap in her executive budget. So the cap still will remain in place, and that's at 460 total. And so we are grateful for the governor's championing everything that she proposed for charters in the budget. And we made some progress. We're not where we want to be by no means. We still have more work to do, and we'll talk about that a little later. But we did get something, and much more than we have received in years past. So we're happy about that, but we still have much work to do on the legislative side for our schools. And now I'm going to pass it on to Mike, who's going to talk a little bit about the charter school funding rate.
Thank you, Natasha. Really appreciate that pass off here. And of course, I know many of you are interested now that the budget is passed, what we're looking at in terms of the funding formula and what rates it sets for the feeding districts for 23-24. This is always sort of an annual piece of information that's crucial for the formulation of your school budgets. And just sort of to set the scene, and I apologize if this is repetitive or this is stuff you already know, but I did just want to contextualize this in terms of providing a quick history of sort of the charter school funding formula or the charter school funding rates. And this is obviously oversimplified and very much an overview, but thinking about not just the last couple of years, but where we've been over the last sort of decade or so was this period where the charter school funding rate was frozen at the fiscal year 2009 level, which was really this period between fiscal year 2009 and fiscal year 15. And then there was this sort of interim period before the resumption of the funding formula from fiscal year 15 to fiscal year 19, in which schools basically got the fiscal year 2009 rate plus the supplemental increase, which started at about $500 above that fiscal year 9 rate. And then it got jumped all the way up to about $1,000 above the rate until the reinstatement of this sort of funding formula that is based on a 3-year look back period. So basically looking at the past 3 years of district expenditures and then taking that average rate of growth as a way of calculating a future rate. And so that's really where we're at, with some small caveats, which are important to look at for the context for 23-24, and probably will continue into 24-25 because of the effect that COVID had on the 2021 school year budgets. But with that, in terms of the actual formula, the statutory language of the formula for 23-24, charter schools are going to receive a funding that is based on a calculation on 2 calculations and the lesser of these 2 calculations. So it's either sort of path A or path B. And in the case of path A, the calculation is the product of the district's funding rate for the previous year. So basically this year's funding rate, whatever you receive per pupil from that district this year, times this average growth rate over the course of 4 years, discounting or removing school year 2021. And I know that sounds really sort of crazy, and we'll look at the actual numbers in just a moment, but it's this base year times an average growth rate, or the amount equivalent to basically the per pupil expenditures of the sending district. In almost, I think, all cases, looking at the calculation, I don't think there's a single district in New York currently where the second option is less than the first option. And so it is typically the first option that will determine your sending rate. And so let's take a look at the actual numbers when we talk about all these different years and all this growth rate stuff. But here's just sort of some mock numbers here. And if we think about this idea of approved operating expense, which is effectively a proxy for what the district is spending in that year to educate students, there are adjustments that are made for certain things like pension costs and other sort of excluded items. But AOE is just a measure of how much is spent by that district in a given year. You can see that there is an AOE quotient or a growth rate that is calculated by basically taking the percent growth from this year minus the previous year divided by the previous year. And that is the AOE quotient that's here in this second row. So included in this year's calculation was the AOE quotient of 1718 over 1617. 18-19 over 17-18, and 19-20 over 18-19. For 23-24, the relevant years are actually going to be the AOE quotients of 21-22, 19-20 over 18-19, and 18-19 over 17-18. So in the case of this district, effectively you would get the average of this 7% growth rate, this 8% reduction, this is actually a 8% decrease in the growth, and the 3% increase. So you would basically average these three growth rate factors, excluding this AOE quotient between 2021 and 1920, because in many cases, districts actually dropped significantly in their AOE between 1920 and 2021 due to COVID. That's why it has been excluded in the statutory language. But it's going to be that average, so we can actually see a illustration of this formula here. So once again, taking this sort of sample district, we would look at this year's core aid funding rate. And for those of you in Rochester, this is going to look very familiar because this is in fact your district's funding formula in this case. But the current year 22-23's funding rate, which is $14,216 per student. And then these AOE quotients that we just went through in the last slide, so that 7% growth, that 8% reduction, and then that 3% growth, that is going to get averaged, which gives us a 0.7% increase when it's averaged. And that is then multiplied to the base rate for next year's core aid projection of $14,316. Now, as I said, this is a two option model. If we were to do this under option 2, which we're only illustrating to show sort of the difference between these two approaches. But if we had option 2, which is the total general fund expenditures divided by the public school enrollment, which includes charter school students, so this is total public school enrollment, we'd actually get a very different core aid rate. And I'll just let that sit there for people to think about the impact or difference between these two formulas, but you can see that illustrated here. And so just to get to the punchline around this, you can see the projection for 23-24 for the core aid for some of our largest sending districts. So these are obviously the big 5 districts. I did not include Yonkers here, but we do have Yonkers on our core aid calculator, which is at the link at the bottom. And you can see for next year, we are predicting a variety of percent increases across some of our largest sending districts. Everything from a 4.1% increase in Buffalo to a very small increase in Rochester of 0.7%. That's not to say that these districts haven't also experienced wide ranges in growth over the last couple of years. And this is a particular challenge with the funding formula as construed. We know that districts are in different places in terms of how their budgets are growing over the years, with some districts continuing to expand and therefore increasing their expenditures, some districts actually shrinking and seeing reductions to their budgets. And so we know that the way the formula is currently constructed under the statutory law does create these, I would call them sort of perverse incentives for charter schools, in the sense that your funding is tied to continued district growth, but that is sometimes challenged when the district is actually declining in enrollment. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the ways that we want to continue to advocate and have advocated for fair and equitable charter school funding, which we'll do in just a moment on the next slide. But did want to showcase what we are projecting for next year for some of these districts with a more expanded review of these core aid rates on our tuition calculator, which is linked in the chat, and I'll relink it in the chat when I'm done speaking. Please note that we try to put as many sort of common sending districts onto that calculator, but if there are additional districts that you need a rate for, I know that many of our districts on Long Island, upstate, you get a very heterogeneous mix of students coming from multiple districts. We're happy to provide those additional core aid rate projections for next year. But with that, taking on that issue of what we want to see with funding, I'm going to turn it back to Natasha for this slide.
So as I mentioned, there is still much work to do. The FY New York State budget is going to provide the $3 million total now in foundation aid, raising at a minimum a 3% increase to all the traditional district schools. So the charter school core aid for many districts does not raise up to that 3% amount, as you saw in the slide where Michael had Rochester is not receiving, that 3%. So just so you know, we had a letter writing campaign directly aimed at this issue, because it is egregious that we don't have schools receiving, that's like 3% is like a cost of living, increase. And our schools are not receiving that. So please know, we have pushed for this and we will continue to push for this. Matter of fact, one of our newest CEMs, Diamond and Rochester, actually hand delivered letters that were signed by charter school leaders to that effect, saying, hey, we need this 3% increase and we are not getting in Rochester. And she hand delivered to every single elected official in Rochester this letter that we signed. So thank you to everyone who signed that letter. Thank you to everyone who sent that letter. We will continue to push on this because it's important, and schools need, the bare minimum. We need to get that cost of living, right, increased at the bare minimum. And so like I said, we advocated for that. Districts like Rochester, Syracuse, Mount Vernon, Lackawanna, Elmira, they don't get that. And so we're going to continue to push on that. And also, as you know, a lot of our, we don't receive funding for programs such as BOCES, My Brother's Keepers, Student Mental Health, Peaceful Clean Green Schools initiatives. We also, again, did letter writing campaigns and sent, I'd say, close to, if not 1,000 letters to the effect that, hey, we need programming included, and we need, facilities aid, we need building aid, we need transportation aid. So we will continue to push on these things because it's great to have, while it's great to have, access to more schools, without equity and funding within those schools, it's just not fair and it's not right. And so we have to
and
continue to push
Natasha,
on that.
at the risk of interrupting you, just because I know it's hard to sort of be presenting and watching the chat, Stacy, Stacy added a comment in the chat, and for those of you who aren't watching a screen, we should see if a private funder might replicate some of the programs we're excluded from and apply as consortiums. So some of them, they're like, you can't be in BOCES if you're not categorized in a certain way. So there's not necessarily a path, there's not a workaround here. And on the one hand, charter schools have a lot of opportunities for private funding resources. And on the other, there's a huge, I think, and this is Natasha, just to add on to what you were saying, like the philosophical perspective of these are public schools, and a willingness to hammer on that point for some amount of time rather than finding the workaround in order to, not sort of sacrifice the perfect as the enemy of the good. But I do, speaking for conversations that Natasha and others have shared with me, the number of people who've been surprised to say, oh wait, charters don't get that. Oh wait, charters don't get that. Or even, quite frankly, and for many of you who over the years, we've had conversations about BOCES who've said, the BOCES want to work with charters and they've been told that they can't. So, we're knocking at the door, guys. And at some point, like finding a workaround might be, I know. Yes, I know. Stacy, I'm with you. So Stacy, for those of you who aren't watching the screen, our kids deserve these programs. They absolutely do. And that is the message. And, Mike Bloomberg and the Summer Boost funding, and we have been honored to support them in their rollout of that program for exactly that reason. But we have to fight on both fronts in terms of these are things that are available with public funding to other public school children, and our children are public school children as well. So sorry, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, Natasha, because I know time is short, but I know it's hard to present and watch the chat.
So yes, what she said, right? And we will continue, you know, to fight, and just know that we're looking at, you know, the state as a whole and trying to do, you know, what is best on behalf of all of our children, because as Anna said, they are public school children. And so if you can go to the next slide, Michael, thank you. So we're going to continue to fight for equity, right? We want more, we deserve more, now children deserve more. So that is fair funding for all charter school children, streamlining state aid, payments for schools that want to opt into that, equal access to public education programs for public charter school students, and the increase to quality schools to promote, and also promoting diversity in school leadership. So those are the things that we will continue to fight for. So stay tuned. And also, you know, so there are some people that are very upset that we did get what we got. And they are going to have, you know, the legislative session is not over until June 8th. And so there will be some more legislation that may come out that may be attempt to be harmful to our schools. And so stay tuned. We may need you to jump into action and again, protect our schools and fight for our schools, as we have always had to do and will always continue to do. So stay tuned. Any questions, comments, concerns about core aid, about any of the anything that passed related to the budget? Any questions, concerns? Anything else in the chat, Anna?
No.
Not seeing anything in the chat. I am going to quickly stop my share real quickly to actually share the link to this PowerPoint. I've gotten several requests to access the information in here, so I'm going to go ahead and just share that directly in the in the chat, so that those of you who are interested in receiving this, you can go ahead and click on the link, make a copy, download it. We'll also be making this recording available at the end of the session, and Anna will talk quickly about how you can access the recording for this session, as well as recordings for all of our past webinars, in fact. But I'll just leave it open for any remaining questions if people either want to place those in the chat or come off mute to ask your question. I know that Natasha, Anna, or I would be happy to provide an answer if we can.
Yeah, and I think I would just say to wrap, that's a great prompt from Mike to prompt me to prompt him to indicate to you the ways that you can access the recording and other notes from this. I think what I would just say, I think like one tactical note that I'd share with everyone is that there are a lot of indications that there's a new wave of revisiting education funding writ large, and in particular in blue states, including in New York. So despite the fact that there is a big win for sort of formula funding, if you will, in New York, that formula itself was relatively dated and arguably outdated pretty recently. And so my crystal ball says that there is going to be, and I say this wearing also my Connecticut hat, and I'd be happy to share with folks under separate cover some of the lessons that we've learned in the Connecticut landscape. That I think that there's a new chapter for thinking about education funding writ large, and that we're going to see the fruits of that in New York in the next couple of years. And the opportunity, the necessity is very clear for charters to be at the table. And the reality of education needs post-COVID in terms of student needs, demographics, the sort of broadly recognized necessity of student-based funding. It's almost impossible for that to not acknowledge the work that you all do. But it's almost impossible doesn't mean that it's impossible. And so we are going to need your all's help to make sure that we're holding open the elevator doors to like put our foot in, to pry it further apart, to make sure that your kids and families are fully represented in all of that work. So, you know, TBD. It's always like, we're like in a Marvel's series here where, and I only say this because I just saw Guardians of the Galaxy 3 with my kids, and I was like, I didn't realize Gamora was dead. Sorry, spoiler for those of you who also didn't realize that. Yes, but you know, the fight the good fight has to keep being fought. So thank you all in advance for being our partners in that, and for all of your work to support your students and families. So Mike, you posted the link for the recording, so folks who were looking out for that should grab that there. And then, as always, be well. What's the NPR's, be well, keep in touch. Let us know how we can help. Thank you, everyone.